Good morning, noon, or night, wherever and whenever you are listening. You are listening to The Shift. I am your host, Doug McKenty. This is episode 19 of The Shift. It's being recorded on November 18th, 2017. If you like what you're listening to, please think about helping us out on Patreon. Our Patreon page is patreon.com/The Shift. If you want to find out more information, go to my Facebook page at The Shift with Doug McKenty. Join the conversation on Twitter at DMcKenty, or check out my website for archives and other information at www.theshiftnow.com. My guest on the show today is Stephen Hummel, host of wisdomicsblog.com and author of the book Money and Wisdom, The Way Out, The Way Home. Stephen proposes a radical way of perceiving finance that goes beyond the concept of universal basic income into the realm of wisdomics, the synthesis of currency and market policy with a higher order understanding that human wisdom is the resource most capable of propelling mankind on a path toward freedom and prosperity. Based on modern monetary theory and an extension of C.H. Douglas's theory on social credit, Wisdomics invites us to transform our financial paradigm from the current debt-based system of enforced scarcity to a system which minimizes debt and provides abundance for all. While it is difficult to imagine that such a system is possible, Stephen outlines how a few simple economic policies could transform our system into one that provides just such abundance for everyone. The hard part is creating the paradigm shift that would make it possible. Thanks, Stephen, for being on the program, and thank you so much for helping to make the shift. How are you doing today?
Very good. And boy, that was such an excellent exposition that, that's very good. I appreciate that. So,
yeah, thanks a lot. I have to say I really enjoyed your book. It was, at first it was like, this sounds almost too simple to be real. And then as I was getting into it, I thought, well, the paradigm shift doesn't have to be super complicated. And really this alignment that you talk about, aligning economic policy, market policy, basically with human goodness, I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, what are we doing right now, actually, that we've gone so far away from this kind of basic notion that we should all be working towards at least, some kind of potential of human wisdom that you describe in the book. What do you think's going on currently that's preventing us from making that connection?
Well, it is a complex set of factors, but, all economic reforms still basically reside within the paradigm of debt only, and it's the indirectness of monetary policy. What the two policies that I talk about, the universal dividend and this the discount to prices at the point of sale, okay, within and throughout the entire economic process, that it eliminates the indirectness rather of all current thinking about monetary policy and like that. If we can maybe talk about the specific operation of that discount policy and how that would actually work, that might help. I mean, for instance, if you tie monetary policy directly to the point of sale, which is when a sale takes place, it is always the summing of total costs and prices for that particular item. And so, and considering that, both the pricing system and the money system are both digital. In other words, $10 of money will eliminate $10 of balance on a loan, and $10 of money will liquidate $10 in prices. Okay? So if you take this discount policy and you tie it directly, not just as social creditors did, which is all well, fine, and good, at the very end of the economic process at retail sale, that's good. That's a further directness of policy. But my innovation of social credit policy is to take that discount policy and put it at the point of sale for every product, from taking ore out of the ground to transport to production to retail sale. That's simplifying the process. But if you take that policy and you put it at the prices that enterprises charge themselves all the way through that process and to retail sale, and so that what you'd be doing with a, let's just for simplicity say take a 50% discount on every price, okay, from one enterprise to another, okay, and you put a 50% discount on that so that they could sell their product at virtually 50% less than what they currently are, okay? And then part of the discount is that it's reciprocal. In other words, the enterprise gives the discount to their customer, and then a monetary authority, and you could mandate the Federal Reserve to do this, or, better in my mind would be a third kind of arm's length monetary authority that is, away from the influences of politics and money, so to speak, would also take this, what they would do is after the enterprise gives the discount, and, everybody's got their books in an enterprise, so they show that a sale is actually taking place at the discount, and then this monetary authority is mandated to rebate back to the enterprise that discount so that they can be whole on their overheads and their profit margins.
Right. Well, let's talk about just the general system before we get too deep into the discount so people can understand why that's necessary. I mean, what you're basically talking about with this universal dividend is what people are now starting to talk about as the universal basic income, right? So you're talking about everybody getting, I think in the book you were talking about $1,500 a month, starting out with giving everybody across the board $100,000 essentially to pay off their debts, and then $1,500 a month as a basic income that everybody has so that we get away from this whole like debt-based system that's based on scarcity. And before we even get into that, though, I wanted you to touch on why in this current system you talk about how cost accounting, the current system, ends up requiring that there is a scarcity of currency in the market. Because this is something that I, with my interviews with Ellen Brown and looking into public banking, and I realized that we have a scarcity of currency in the current market, which is why everybody has to get into debt, this debt-based system. They don't pay us enough money to pay off production. So we're constantly competing. There's not enough money out there. There's not enough money out there. The money's created out of debt. And then you're getting a certain salary, but the salary's not covering the cost of the overall cost of production and all the stuff that's getting produced. And then you take out loans to make up for the difference so you can buy all the stuff that's out there, but then the money is not even created to pay the interest. So we're all in this situation where we're competing with each other to buy the stuff that we need and to pay the interest back on the loans that we have to get because there's not enough money in the system, and it's just this never-ending cycle. So will you go into describing that and how cost accounting is another way of maintaining the scarcity of currency out there right now?
Right. Well, cost accounting, if you look at it this way, the total individual incomes, including dividends and salaries to the owner, etc., is, can be ideally, and it's never that way because Keynes and other people recognize that saving and profit actually are costs to the system macroeconomically. So that creates a gap in and of itself. But cost accounting again will show that the total that is paid out to individuals is only a subset of total costs, because you have sunken costs that in the temporal universe are inevitable, like depreciation. Means of production breaks down or becomes obsolescent, and you have to keep replacing that. And some people say, oh well, you have depreciation allowances for businesses. Well, yes, you do, but a depreciation allowance is not a forgiveness of costs. It's just a stay of execution of them, because eventually, if you don't charge that extra for the depreciation costs, then when your means of production breaks down or whatever, and you don't have the money to replace it, you're in big trouble.
Right.
So it's if you pay very close attention again to the fact, it goes back to C.H. Douglas and social credit, if you're aware of that.
Yeah, please describe that history to my listeners here, because that's something I was unfamiliar with C.H. Douglas's work until you brought it up, and I looked into it and I thought, wow, because this is the foundation of what's now called, it seems like this universal basic income idea just showed up last year or in the last couple of years, and people are starting to talk about it, but it's actually been this movement that's been going on for almost 100 years now. So give us some of that history, please.
Well, C.H. Douglas proposed his social credit theory back before World War II. In fact, shortly after World War I. And, what he eventually posited was what's called the A plus B theorem, which is that A, will not pay for B, in costs. That's essentially what, his whole cost accounting and calculations were. Douglas was a contemporary of Keynes, and testified before a lot of different Canadian and British commissions during the Great Depression, and he was a contemporary of Keynes, and Keynes was Keynesianism, in my opinion, was definitely an improvement over what they had. It was kind of the birth of macroeconomics itself, but Keynes again did not go deeply enough, go as deep in his policies as Douglas did. And there are a couple of quotes which I can't give you now, but in Keynes's magnum opus, that he essentially said the exact same that what Douglas said. Okay, that you can always pay something, but in paying it, the costs still exceed what you're paying, and so what it compels, as you kind of mentioned in the question, is that it compels continuous borrowing in order to keep the macro system functioning. But if you continue borrowing enough, even at 0% interest, you're still going to run into what we're facing now, which is again what Steve Keen talks about, which is debt deflation. In other words, if your income is $100 or $1,000 and your debt service and food, etc., is $1,500 a month, you got trouble.
Right.
So, that's why an additional a gift, which is costless, is the solution to that systemic problem, because it doesn't add a cost, and it provides it fills the gap between what's increasingly been debt.
Well, the other thing, and just to simplify this enough for everybody to kind of get it, is that what you're saying is that, in terms of what companies pay out, if you just across the board look at what companies pay out in terms of wages, salaries, and dividends, and then you look at what they're producing, what they're paying out is not enough money to buy all the stuff that they're producing. So there's there's just not enough money in the system to be able to actually pay for all the stuff that's getting produced. Plus, as you were talking about, plus then, the overhead, the other costs of business besides just the wages and the salaries that are out there. So there's just basically not enough money out there to allow the economy to continue to grow without giving this huge chunk of debt service to the banking system right now. So you're proposing, and the idea behind this universal basic income to make up the difference, and what you call the universal dividend, is just to give people enough money to make up that difference every month. Not only does this give everybody, enough to get by, which is nice, so that we don't have to worry about where we're going to go to eat, or, at least we can afford some food and a place to stay. But then it frees up the economy so that, one of the things that you get into even is talking about money more as a vote. Instead of everybody scrambling around to try to figure out how to make it, we have this system that's based on abundance, where money is more like voting on what you think, how you think our society should go forward. Here's the technologies that we prefer. Getting away from this competitive model and starting to develop an abundant model, which can, well, go ahead. Go ahead.
Which C.H. Douglas referred to it as changing the power from, the elite, the banking business model, and the corporate business model, taking the power that they hold and with the dividend, placing the choice in the many hands of individuals. In other words, the individuals have that have that power with their money vote. That's exactly what he said.
Yeah. That's just the whole thing here. You talk in your book a lot about, the difference between slavery and freedom, basically. And the bankers have this system set up so that we're all working for them. This is a slave system. And imagine what humanity would be like, if it was liberated and we could actually make choices for ourselves and have an economy based on a free society.
Precisely. Yes. The experiment with Homo economicus it's not only failing, it's very restrictive. If with abundance and leisure and a little guidance from the helping professions, the clergy, and maybe business, government, public service announcements, you could make people and guide people to help them be more, have their own self-chosen goals, as opposed to having so much of your time and energy taken up in economics and finding economic security. So, what kind of a society could we have if you had the leisure time and the monetary resources to pursue those things, In my way of thinking, it would be such, the arts and other things like that, other areas like that, community, family time, things like that would be greatly enhanced.
Well, it's funny because I hear a lot of people right now really being concerned about, as technology improves, we're all just going to lose our jobs to the robots. And then we're all going to be like living in poverty because we don't have any jobs anymore. And the robots are going to be doing all the work, when it seems to me like it should be more like what you're talking about. Well, as the robots are doing the work, we have more leisure time to produce art and culture and the other things that human beings should be able to do. If we're not plugged into this scarcity system, if we're just given enough currency to make the job, to be the oil in the machine that makes humanity function.
Yep, I completely agree. And, it's anxiety and fear about change. That would be a good change. But again, with the help of government, with the help of the helping professions, etc., I'm sure, that, in the first place, 90% of us, even under an austere system, manage to stay out of the slammer, So,
yeah.
If you had an abundant system instead of an austere and onerous one, how much, more good could come from that, especially if steered in positive and constructive directions.
Well, what do you say when people just, come back at you with, well, why would anybody work? If you're given this money and you don't need to, why would you bother to work?
Well, yeah, I mean, the answer to that is, number one, with this kind of a system, there would things take place where we could produce so much more without, even with less employment. But, the fact is that if you have abundance, a lot more money available, you're going to have a whole lot more employment than you do without it, number one. So that will tend to kind of slow that process. And then, I don't look, there's nothing wrong with employment. I'm not against that, of course, either. But, what if you just decided to redefine the idea of full-time work as 20 hours a week? I mean, that way you immediately reduce the unemployment rate, as deceptive as that actually is, to half of what it is. And, you're not everybody's going to quit work, because people do find purpose in their work, and what policies of social credit and extended in Wisdomics Graceonomics is not out to destroy employment at all. I think it will increase. I just think that the effects of the policies will be so beneficial socially and psychologically that it should allay any fears that everybody is going to quit working. Not everybody is going to quit working, because people, number one, $1,500 a month, that's a nice little sum, and if you have the head of a household, two people, and so you got $3,000 a month coming in, whether you do a lick or not. Well, that's an okay lifestyle, but
right.
We're acquisitive, and so why not work 20 hours a week instead of 40 hours a week, and you end up making 3 times more than what you made before the integration of the dividend and employment. And hey, it sounds good to me.
Yeah, I think something odd is going on right now, and I mean, statistics back this up, that productivity increases have not been, if I can say this, trickling down to the worker. And so, I mean, we have this thing now called the internet, which has made humanity, how much more efficient. And yet I look around and people are working harder for less than they ever have before. And, that's the interesting thing. I mean, the technology is certainly there to make humanity efficient enough that we could be working 20-hour work weeks, doing what we love, not scrambling around for food and for rent, but doing something that we truly enjoy, just following our passions, working 20 hours a week and being able to make it happen. If we had this financial system, I think that would just make the currency available to grease the wheels of the machine. So, I mean, it's interesting. The second issue, and this is the issue that I often had with the universal basic income, but now that's where you get into the idea of discounting prices, is that a universal basic income or this kind of universal dividend would just cause inflation in the system, that everybody just would start to charge more for what they have because everybody's getting free money. And so, it would negate the benefits of the extra cash that you were being given. But that's where you get into this whole idea of the discount price. So can you explain that, now that we've got a little backstory for everybody, how that would work?
Well, yeah, I mean, you would have to have certain rules, to the policies also. In other words, for instance, I mean, if it looked like a discount and dividend policies were going to be implemented, businesses could all of a sudden start jacking their prices up so that, they're a whole lot higher than what they would, normally make a reasonable profit on. And, but what you could do is like say, okay, your prices have to begin at the point before you started, jacking those prices up before in anticipation of these two policies going into effect. That plus, there is enough competitiveness between businesses where you couldn't just, individually jack your prices up a whole lot without having to worry about losing market share. And that plus, the thing that is, in my opinion, so good about the integration of both the dividend and the discount policy is that, if you implemented a 50% discount on all those prices and on prices that individuals paid for consumer products at retail, it's an offer to businesses and retail, the model of retail, that they really cannot refuse, because if you don't participate in the program honestly, then you have to get your full price, but you can't discount your price down to half of what it was. Okay, so you're going to, one of the reasons why I said that we should, again, the discount should go right directly to the point of sale throughout the economy, is because if you only did it at retail sale, then you would leave open the possibility, without correction, of every business model before retail, which is the end of the economic process, jacking up their prices. And there would be no way to actually combat that unless you gave them the discount also. And then again, they really kind of have to participate in this, or else, their competition is going to participate in it, and they're consequently going to be able to sell at 50% less than what you can, because you don't give the discount, you don't get any rebate.
Yeah, I mean, this system is still compatible essentially with free market economics. It's just about bringing in enough currency to really, it's like I keep coming up with this metaphor of greasing the machine. Like, there's just not enough grease in the machine to make it run as smoothly as it should be. And so if you inject more grease into the machine, then look at what we can have, a whole system based on abundance and not based on scarcity. So the only people that really lose are the bankers, Yeah,
but the truth is, let me look and see if I can find that one little example. For instance, if a home builder, their normal price is $200,000 for a home, but with the discount, they can offer it to the customer for $100,000. Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. And then if you even included the banks in that discount program, and, they're willing to give you a loan, okay, normally for $1,000, but they're going to discount it to you for $50,000, and yet they get $50,000 rebated back to them, so they can still make a profit. You can actually include finance in this, but they have to participate by the rules, of course, too. Right. So it's all good for the consumer, and eventually, again, what you're creating, as you said, is an actual money economy, as opposed to an only debt economy. That's the paradigm: money versus debt, or gifting versus debt. And if you create enough gifting in the economy and still control inflation with the discount policy, what you do is you build up everybody's capabilities to save without creating inflation, so that the systemic and individual need to borrow, that market is greatly reduced.
Right.
So, those two policies together, those specific policies of a relatively abundant dividend and a discount to at the point of retail, at the point of sale throughout the economy, are what will, it changes all of the complexity, again, of monetary policies carried out by central banks and governments, etc., and makes and simplifies it as, an exchange and, it reduces costs and prices greatly, but it vastly increases the individual's abundant monetary stature.
Right. Right. Well, so let's get into, because a lot of what you're talking about is what would happen then after we had this kind of policy in place. What happens to humanity in a situation where they have abundance and they're not existing in scarcity? Just the benefits to humanity in terms of mental health alone is pretty huge.
Yeah.
You can imagine there's going to be less mental health issues and then a lot less crime as well, because people aren't going to be living in poverty or be living paycheck to paycheck or be so concerned about how they're going to make it through the next month or the next couple of months. So that right there is a huge benefit. But then you get into talking about what you call the monetary economic sapient synthesis theory, which is starting to get humanity on the right track, where we're starting to synthesize our innate capability of human wisdom with public policy and moving forward on a better path, instead of this path. Gosh, I even start to think about it. Like right now, what are we doing? Everybody's just scraping by. We don't even have time to think about what it means to be a wise, or what we want. Native Americans talk about the seventh generation. How we're talking about what's going on next month, not what's happening at 7 generations from now, because we just don't have time. We're too busy putting food on the table right now. So can you get into that a bit?
Well, as the saying goes, the Martians must be laughing.
Right.
It's that MESST, I believe that was in the original book there. I really like that also. I changed that, to Wisdomics and Graceonomics, but it's my idea that it's not a coincidence to me that the concept behind gifting, which is the new monetary paradigm, and of the experience that every wisdom tradition points at, whether you call it grace or Satori, Kensho, Samadhi, whatever, that experience that is pointed at by the major wisdom traditions, is, the experience of grace, which is a dynamic present time experience where you're integrating continuously in present time. And so, I talk about economics, but, my thing also is about this monetary economic spiritual synthesis theory, because again, grace is what's behind gifting, and grace as in graciousness, you can, I know in the West, that grace, it's associated with Christianity. Everybody can think exactly as they so please, but I'm not using it in a sectarian or specific Christian sense. I'm talking about it, as that experience that all wisdom traditions are pointing at. But anyway, the gifting is an aspect of grace, and grace that's outside the circle of economics, it's outside of the circle of philosophy, and it's into spirituality. So grace, the concept of grace, if you really contemplate it long enough, really begins to enlighten you about, how things could be temporally and within yourself. So that's why I originally called it monetary economic spiritual synthesis theory, which I'm fine with too. But again, in the economic book, I'm calling it gifting. because sometimes, people, they don't see how everything basically can be integrated, mental levels, or, from, you know, both mentally and temporally, things can be integrated.
Well, we're starting to get into some really interesting concepts here. I've been dabbling myself in that there are basically two different kinds of consciousness. And the way that I've been describing it just to myself lately is that there's the consciousness of empire, essentially, which is the one that I think most of us have been indoctrinated into at this point, where you're thrown into this situation where there's a hierarchy. Most of us are towards the bottom of the hierarchy, and we're all kind of scrambling around in this situation of debt slavery where we just have to work for those that are higher up in the hierarchy. And we don't really have time to think about things like wisdom and grace and, integrating holistic, integrative consciousness and things like that. But once we shift our paradigm into this, what you're describing as these wisdom traditions. So can you describe, give some examples of some wisdom traditions and what that means to you? And then maybe expand on this idea of gifting as well. Because I know, gifting is actually becoming quite popular from an anthropological point of view, because people are looking at these pre-empire cultures, if you will, or these more indigenous cultures, that used to, because they did feel abundance, their economies were based on this gifting concept. So try to talk a little bit then about the wisdom traditions and the gifting that is associated with that.
Well, okay, was it the Iroquois, or what was it, the indigenous, that the gifting was such an integral part of their system? I forget. I know that there are some American Indian traditions like that, but
I think it was pretty ubiquitous. I mean, I think it was just a big part of indigenous cultures that this was their way of trading. Basically, because they didn't think in terms of scarcity. It was just, you always had an abundance, so you gave and you got, and it was just a cultural thing.
Yeah. I mean, so I'm not as well schooled on that as I probably should be, but that's true. And so far as again, the spiritual wisdom tradition tie-in, it's largely, if you do understand that, when Christians talk about God's grace falling upon them, well, what if that's actually just your consciousness coming completely into present time and being totally integrated with space and time and in whatever you're experiencing around you? That to me is what that experience naturally actually is. You have traditions like the Zen Buddhist tradition, where they're called wall gazers. One of their disciplines is to sit and simply look at present time, not only to develop their mental discipline on present time, but, and I've had this experience, if you simply sit and look. For instance, the experience, one of the experiences I had was, I sat down with a piece of yellow ledger paper, and I looked around me, and this was in a little guard shack. I was like doing the midnight shift, the graveyard shift as a security guard at a campground. And in this little guard shack, I made a little hash mark for every experience, everything started with objects that I could see around me, and everything that I hadn't noticed before. And you keep doing that, no matter what idea or thought comes to your mind, you just keep focusing on separate things, and every time you do, you make a hash mark. Well, I got to I forget the exact number, but I got to 1,300 hash marks of specific different things around me that normally you're not consciously aware of. And also, what you become aware of is the space around you is more real. It's almost palpable. Okay?
Mm.
And you don't see anything differently quantitatively than it is. In other words, I didn't see a dog with 5 legs that was green or something, but you see it more vividly.
Right.
And that's talked about in all the wisdom traditions, that is satori. You're, wow, it's me, and I'm here experiencing things right now, and wow, are they ever different than my normal walking
Right.
around state of consciousness, you see. And I mean, that's again, it applies philosophically to economics, but it also applies experientially to the individual. And the concept behind economics is grace as in gifting, and the concept of spirituality is grace, the experience of the present moment, and how you maintain that.
Yeah, I mean, when our economic system is keeping us so stressed out all the time and so just functional, purely functional, where we're working and we're basically working again for these people that are farther up on the pyramid than we are, and we're spending all of our time struggling, then we don't have the time to really even experience that the moment as it is around us, and we're too stressed out to even be able to appreciate what's going on around us. So just, I mean, in terms of the quality of life that we're given in the current economic system, is just not nearly what it could be if we did have the spare time and that release from the anxiety that the rat race and the constant struggle is forcing all of us into. So, what do you see as trying to synthesize this graceonomics into actual policy? I mean, how do we align, like, what is this synthesis between this kind of, this potential for human wisdom and then the translation into actual monetary policy? Or does the monetary policy come first and then humanity just simply has the spare time to be able to pursue its own, its own wisdom in that way?
Yeah, I think, the implementing the policies, the economic policies and monetary policies would be a tremendous step towards enabling, the further philosophical and spiritual synthesis. What was I going to say? And I think, one of the things that we need to get to is what I would refer to as Operation, Wisdom or Operation Grace, which would be a mass social movement that would be communicated to large constituencies like students, basically any individual that was willing to listen, and, for instance, the small to medium-sized business community, showing them how these policies would tremendously benefit them. It's in their interests, as opposed to, being slavishly tied to the paradigm of debt, which finance, as has been the problematic business model for the last 5,000 years. I'd say it's time we change that,
Right.
And, if you could get a movement that would communicate the self-interest of small business owners, small to medium-sized business owners, students, others, that these policies would give them, then, that's how Gandhi did it. That's how MLK did it, with a social movement. And hopefully, you could herd the entire political apparatus towards realizing that, hey, we better latch onto these policies and implement them, or, these large constituencies are going to throw you out of office. That thing.
Right.
So that.
Yeah, I think Well, I think you talk about, and I've heard this number being thrown out before, but it really only takes 10% of the population to be active in order to make these kinds of changes. Like it's actually quite amazing that the active 10% of the population really determines the way things are going. I mean, unfortunately, the active 10% right now is, I think, helping to create this system that seems like it's. I mean, I'm looking at the current system right now, and it actually blows me away. It's like it's corruption. It's not even hiding itself, really. I mean, it's corruption right in front of your face, and then you ask it, well, why are you acting so corrupt? And oh no, we're not corrupt. And well, yeah, you. It's like they're just pretending like they're not screwing everybody all the time.
Yeah, that's another thing that I think if you look historically, that one of the signs that a paradigm change is necessary is that number one, there are no solutions. Look at the Trump administration. They got majorities in both houses. They can't even implement their own agenda, okay? Because everything is so confused and nothing really resolves, okay? You have to go deeper to the paradigm level, okay, to actually make things work. And again, things don't work. One thing can be construed as, its opposite. You see that in the political thing going on now, which, I am in no way, I'm completely against Trump simply because, he's kind of the antithesis of graciousness.
Right.
But in my mind, and this is another book I'm working on called The Cosmic Code, which is just a formula, okay, that and stated the cosmic code of wisdom is you integrate the truths and only the truths of apparently opposing perspectives, and that integration, that fundamental integration, leads to a thirdness and greater oneness. That's what we really need, economically, politically, and otherwise. Because I'm getting a little bit afraid that we're setting ourselves up, that we're getting so contentious that we're heading towards a disintegrative moment in our culture. And rather than have that happen, you need that fundamental integration which creates the third alternative,
Well, this is a great point. I mean, as an observer of politics for the last 20 years, you can pretty much show that, people elect all Democrats, and so the House and the Senate and the president, they're all Democrats, and then they don't do what they said they were going to do, and then 8 years later they elect all Republicans, and then the Republicans don't do what they said they were going to do, and then and we're just going back and forth, and the people are so sick of it because it's completely dysfunctional. I mean, whatever the people want is definitely not getting reflected in the economic and the political process right now. I mean, whatever we can say about it, I think everyone can observe that, the election system's not working. I even think that politicians get involved in the system. They may have some integrity, but they get in there and they can't do anything about it. Like the whole system itself is just ridiculously dysfunctional. And I actually get the feeling that now most people are sitting around waiting for the whole thing to collapse. I mean, it's exactly what you're saying. We're obviously headed towards a disintegrative situation where we could be thrown back into the Stone Age if we're not careful, if we don't figure out how to synthesize these opposing viewpoints like you're talking about. I mean, it is complicated though. I mean, there's you talk about it a little bit in the book that I read, that where there's 2 points of view and everybody wants to fight about it all the time. And it's so easy. I think the system actually exploits this kind of natural tendency of human beings to want to get into this conflict, when the paradigm shift is when you can integrate the two and you can come up with a third perspective. I mean, this is what the yin yang is all about, the Tai Chi symbol. So some, with some wisdom traditions, they understand this and they can move beyond this kind of slave system where everybody's scurrying around in this rat race. But if we, here in the West and especially in the United States, we could be a really powerful force for change in the way that the world functions. And instead, we're clinging to this post-World War II mentality that really only benefits a few people on the top of the pyramid. And the rest of us are just scurrying around, not knowing what's going, waiting for the apocalypse to happen. So
right, yeah, and that's, as the old saying goes, the only way for evil to win is for good people to do nothing. And
right.
If there's, I see, particle of truth and untruth in both a liberal and conservative political and economic perspective. That's why I think you should integrate only the truth. But having said that, I look at guys like Steve Bannon, who he's a well-read person. He's intelligent, but he doesn't know what to do with all of these ideas. He just kind of smashes them all together. And he's an advocate of a couple of guys who wrote this book, The Fourth Turning, which on the one hand, it is maybe historically accurate, but what it's pointing at, in my opinion, is the fourth turning is actually the failure to bring about this fundamental thirdness by the integration of the truths and opposing aspects or opposing perspectives. If you integrate that, then you get this thirdness, oneness, and you avoid all the chaos that Bannon, thinks is going to save us. But, the chaos, lots of times, that's how revolutions get betrayed. That's how the powers that be that, are above it all can still come back and control the system. If we blew all of our productive means up, the finance would be happy to lend us the money to rebuild it,
Right, for sure.
We've got to find that third way first before we get to the fourth turn. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Another concept that you bring up in the book is just about this idea that reality trumps theory. And that seems to be like something that people get so caught up in, is thinking about their theories, their economic theories. My theory must be better than your theory, and constantly fighting over it instead of just realizing that here we are on the ground just trying to get by. What can we do to make things better?
Yeah, again, and that is, you even see that, unfortunately, in monetary reform movements, etc. Like, Steve Keen, Michael Hudson, MMT, Ellen Brown with public banking. I'm for all of those, actually, because I think they are aspects of the whole solution.
Right.
But again, you want to going to the point of the paradigm, and then implementing policies based on that paradigm is the final key to making it all work together, in my opinion. And what was I going to say? Yeah, I don't want to impugn anybody because I see. But I just made a couple of posts on an MMT blog, and where they're into the job guarantee, which I don't have a problem with, but they're anti UBI or universal dividend. And all I say is that why not integrate both of them? And when I do that, then you get a lot of flack from people saying, "Oh no. Universal dividend is a bunch of nonsense, blah, 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 blah." So, unfortunately, opinions and ego gets too involved, in even monetary reform, so.
Well, I've actually thought, and I was going to bring this up with you, my ultimate solution is to just, and I think maybe this is the paradigm shift, at least for me, is to break down this notion that there's got to be one financial system. Why don't we have multiple currencies, multiple concepts competing against each other? I think that could fill this void. The idea that we all have to work in the dollar. We're handing the monopoly of the currency over to the Federal Reserve, and then they can exploit it for everything. It's like, why are we doing that? Why don't we have public banks for every county and city government around? And why don't we have other, credit options with other currencies? And why don't we have, UBIs? Or why don't we have, one of the big things that I've been trying to work towards with this show is just the idea of community rights, that your community should figure out what works for you. I mean, why do we have to have this notion that the nation state or even the world economy has to be all interconnected with this one currency and this one financial system? I mean, I think that's the biggest thing that holds us back from really being able to, just to come up with a better way. I mean, let's just, if we kind of, if we stopped thinking that there was one correct way and just started, letting the mishmash happen and see what worked for everyone, then, I think we'd come up with something better.
Well, I don't necessarily disagree with that, but, the thing, number one, the financial powers that be, could easily disrupt, various aspects of a priori decentralized kind of situation, which, even with a paradigm change, we're going to have certain reasonably ethical financial regulations. Like, the government is going to have to say, look, if a couple of billionaires over here in China decide to do a naked short on our currency, go ahead, but to us, we're going to consider that null and void. That's that kind of thing. But again, I have nothing against decentralization, but if you utilize the pricing system of commerce now, it's with those policies, you get more bang for your buck than if you're distributing 5,000, whatever you call them in the I forget what they used to call it, liberty something or other currencies from cities and areas that those are obviously better than not having them. But again, I think if you utilize the present system and tie it directly to pricing, the pricing system, to the point of sale, that you get better cooperation from all of the enterprises that are participating, and that, there are hierarchies in spirituality that, for instance, you have, from bottom up, you have data, then you have, let me think here. You have data, you have, you have data, and then you have, knowing on a mind level, philosophical, and then you have knowledge, self-knowledge. So,
right.
and those are spiritual hierarchies they're like modes of experience. So, decentralization is good on the one hand, and yet when probably my motto is always, when in doubt, integrate. So you could integrate decentralization and acknowledged spiritual hierarchies, like, and apply them even to economics again, because the point of sale is actually analogous to self-knowledge in that spiritual hierarchy,
right?
Because it is, number one, it's the purpose of the economic system is to sell your product and get it consumed. And the purpose of the consumer is to get the consumption. And so what it does is it links putting those policies at point of sale is like the moment of satori in spirituality, because it's in present time. Each moment of a sale is like you coming fully into present time. And that is the point. And that's why the policy goes to that point, to the point of sale, the discount policy. Because, again, it's economically, it's analogous to the point of present time for the individual.
Interesting.
So,
yeah, it makes sense. It's that moment where you make a choice.
Yes.
Well, we've got a few minutes left, and this might be a little bit of a big topic to introduce right now, but if you could just give us a few minutes on this concept of grace, the notion of faith that you break down in the book into confidence, hope, love, and grace. Then there's this kind of pathway that we can take to this higher awareness level that we can apply to our economic thinking. Do you want to just try to describe that to us a little bit and help us? I think if we can finish on a deeper understanding of this concept of grace as it applies both economically and spiritually, might help to wrap it up for people.
Right. Well, okay, I mean, faith, hope, and love, okay, that's a trinity. It's three things, three experiences. And this plays in kind of to my other book, The Cosmic Code, where I told you about it's a trinity, unity, oneness, wholeness, consciousness process. That's the actual description of the concept. But you've got faith, hope, and love, and if you build faith as in confidence, that can, faith can be transcendental or it can be simply psychological. So if you combine confidence with confidence, you're going to produce more hope, because if you're not confident, you don't have hope.
Right.
So it's a process of those three things. Faith, as in confidence, engenders hope. Hope engenders the future, so to speak. Okay? You're looking more into the future, or more into present time. And love, of course, is universally acknowledged as the wisdom, and every wisdom tradition is kind of the factor. And then, so faith, hope, and love integrated in that trinity unity actually results in grace, which, to me, the definition of grace is this. It's a verb. It's that process of having faith, hope, and love within you, and then expressing it out here in the temporal universe. So grace is that spiritual concept. And again, grace, an aspect of it, as applied to the economic system as gifting, is also that integration. If you have confidence in the economic system because you've got money in your hand all the time, and that gives you hope, and you feel a whole lot better about yourself and probably others also, which will, if you work on it a little bit individually, will, result in more graciousness. You'll have more community, more, things like that, all kinds of offshoots of and aspects of grace, which is love in action. That's my definition of grace. It's not transcendental. It's simply psychological and temporal.
Well, that's what I enjoyed, I think, the most about getting into your work over the last week, Steve, was just the way that you make these typically intangible concepts that people sort of think about as pie in the sky. But then you apply them, like you're talking about, in this temporal world, and applying them to economics, which is really on the ground. How do we get stuff done? And saying, well, hey, why don't we apply these ideas to how we get by on our day-to-day life? And it just clicked for me that makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's a lot. I think, as you were talking, I was realizing that thinking a lot about the existential despair that so many people get caught up in. I think because there's this disconnect between these ideas of hope and love, faith, hope, and love, and acting graciously. That's not what people are doing when they're thinking about economics these days. They're thinking because of the scarcity, because of the debt slavery, they're in a constant state of competition and anxiety about where their next meal is going to come from. If they're not, towards the top of the hierarchy. And so, it tends to make people disassociate from these positive feelings and kind of exist in a situation where they've just kind of lost that connection. And they are really feeling, like, what is the point of it all? Oh, I have to get up. I have to go to work. I have to pay my bills. And I'm going to be doing this every day until the day that I die, and there's no hope, right?
Yeah, it's onerous, and
yeah.
Unfortunately, I am foursquare for science, but as I say, science, like food, is wonderful, beautiful, necessary, but it resides entirely within the digestive tract of wisdom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
I mean, science it's virtually co-equal with wisdom. It's just that science tends to emphasize fragmentation of truth, while wisdom combines it and integrates it.
Yeah, if you can't integrate it all back together, then what's the point, right?
Right. And as you pointed out, science, I don't think consciously even has, not negated, but there's a bias in a lot of scientific thinking against religion, which is kind of, on the one hand, is probably correct, but what they need to do is integrate with spirituality.
Yeah, I agree 100%.
Yeah. So, and again, the paradigm is the deepest component of any solution to a problem, and I think that that concept of the concept behind the paradigm of economics is grace, and it applies to economics and to spirituality. And there's no need to have an unnecessary, bifurcation of those two factors, economics and spirituality.
Well, that's great, Steve. I really enjoy getting into your work, and I appreciate the conversation. We're a little bit over an hour now, so we probably could go on talking all afternoon, but I think we should cut it off there. But do you want to tell people, what you're working on now and where people can go, what your website is, where people can go to find out more information and maybe take a look at some of your work?
Well, yeah, there is my wisdomicsblog.com. You can go there and see, for the last couple of years I've been posting there. I don't, unfortunately, I don't have, I'm working on the Wisdomics Graceonomics book, and I'm simultaneously working on the Cosmic Code book. Hopefully looking forward to, I'll probably end up self-publishing it and maybe getting a website for both of those. I'm also, interested in doing, speaking to students, small to medium-sized business community, etc., about these economic policies, and hopefully, that picks up. I don't have any place else to go for anybody to go if they're interested, but once I do, maybe I'll get a website about, you know, creating this, mass movement, social movement to help herd the political apparatus towards these policies. So stay tuned, I guess.
Yeah, well, that sounds great, and I'll make sure and put in the show notes how people can get in touch with you, at least at wisdomicsblog.com. And I appreciate you coming on. I mean, I think that anything that we can do to continue this conversation, just to open people's minds to the possibilities that are out there, especially when it comes to finance and economics. It's amazing how much human potential is held back by the current system right now. And I think the more that we can start to think outside the box, then the more that we have this potential into the future to not disintegrate, but become more integrative, as you've described, as we continue to try to make this paradigm shift happen. So I really appreciate your work. And I just want to take a couple of minutes here at the end to remind everyone you've been listening to The Shift. My name is Doug McKenty. I'm happy to be your host. If you like what you're listening to, please think about supporting us on Patreon, becoming a patron. That's patreon.com/The Shift. If you want to find out more information, check out my Facebook page at The Shift with Doug McKenty. Contact me on Twitter to join the conversation at DMcKenty, or check out my website, and you can fill out the contact form there too if you want to get in touch with me at www.theshiftnow.com. All right. Thank you so much, Steve, for being on the program. Steve Hummel at wisdomicsblog.com. And I really appreciate the conversation. Have a great day.
Thanks. I really appreciate it too.
All right. Take care, Steve. Have a good one.